Okay guys, so in this video we are going to talk about Firebase and vendor locking. So let's get into it. So basically what we're going to cover is that we're going to talk about what is Firebase, we're going to talk about vendor locking and what that is, and we're going to talk about when we want to avoid vendor locking and when it can actually be useful to accept a certain degree of vendor locking. So the easiest way to probably demo Firebase here is to actually do something with Firebase. And actually the whole reason behind this question is because Mr. Patrick Taylor here had a question. He wanted to basically ask me, would you please pick some documentation, maybe Firebase, and explain it? Oh God, should I explain the Firebase documentation? That's a bit of a tall order. Maybe explain what programming concepts you would need to know to understand it. Well, yeah, that is also going to be a very tricky thing if you've read it and you can't understand it. But I will give it a bash and I will try. So let's go to Firebase. And Firebase is, well, Firebase helps mobile and web app teams succeed. That is what they do. Isn't that amazing? How nice of them. Build apps fast without managing infrastructure. Oh, amazing. Backed by Google, which makes me trust them immediately. Trusted by top apps. Oh, see, they don't even need my trust. One platform with products that work better together. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds absolutely great. And here is a little list of like all the things that they support. A comprehensive app development platform. Tells you all the things without saying really much. But then again, you have to kind of accept that because they have so many things that they give you. And the reason why they offer you all of this is very simple. And the reason why they endorse, why they say they're backed by Google is because they are literally just that. They are a platform built on top of the GCP, well, the Google, and which is the Google Cloud. That is what they are. You can even see here that I have my own little console here. This is like even on their website. I can actually go to my Google Cloud account and I can actually manage all of my infra. I could technically do all of this without Firebase. All of the things that they are offering, which is one of those things that I need to have said here in order for the vendor locking problem to be more comprehensible. Basically, anything Firebase can do, I could do without Firebase, but they make it very convenient. So I went to their website and I basically just created an account like this, and then all you have to do is that go to this little web page here and you click add project and then you create a project, and that's exactly what I did. And here is my project, my absolutely amazing project. Their design team is really good at this, but I wonder if they have their own designers or if they're actually using Google's design team. Doesn't really matter. It's all good. And then we have all of these nice little services here. We have functions, which is the thing that we're going to look at, and also a little bit of database storage. And here I have already created 2 functions because I've kind of cheated and started a little bit ahead. So this is the web interface where I manage my quote-unquote infrastructure. And I have a bunch of extensions and other things that I can use. So this is the web platform pretty much. But the other part of this is to actually grab hold of their actual documentation. Let's have a look here if we can go and let's see. Yeah, here it is, collection documents. This is the SDK client reference documentation for the web interface that they have. So basically, there's a bunch of documentation here for different things that you can do, and this is the thing that Mr. Taylor wanted to know about. The problem is that when he expressed that question, okay, what concepts do you actually need to understand in order to understand this documentation? Well, from my perspective as the person who is making this video, I kind of look at this and I go, well, you're probably going to have to know JavaScript because Firebase, like all of these Lambda functions, they're pretty much built in JavaScript or in TypeScript. And then they compile to JavaScript, of course. And then you kind of need to know about networks. You need to understand, like most of what you want to know about Firebase, you can actually read in their documentation. You can go to this documentations page over here. And then you can spend hours and hours and hours, and I'm not joking here because I have done this for a semi-serious project way back when, and there is just so much, and there are so many things that you need to learn about their platform and the way that they work with their systems that it can be a bit of a hassle. It's the same sort of thing you would have to go through if you wanted to be a WordPress developer. It's the same thing you have to go through if you want to be a Gatsby developer or Next.js. Like, doesn't really matter. This is a framework or a platform for application development. So if I go to my terminal now, and let's say, for the sake of argument, that I am in my documents folder here, and I want to create a demo project. Demo 2. And let's go to demo 2, because I already have a demo sheet project here. So this is an empty folder. So I've already installed with using npm, and the command is npm I think it's Firebase tools, like so, global, and then you actually have that installed. So I will say Firebase Init. And to my great joy, there's actually a wizard here to setting up a Firebase project. So I will say that, okay, I want the functions and I want the Firestore, which is a database. And then I can use an existing project or create a new one. I already have a project because I made one earlier, as you saw. And here it's actually connecting, and you can see that here's my demo project. I can use the Firestore rules, whatever that is. Well, I kind of know what that is, but I'm just joshing with you. And then we want to decide which language. All right, let's do JavaScript, because TypeScript is, well, it's a little bit overkill for this. No ESLinting because we're sloppy coders. I like my sloppy code. And then we can install our dependencies. And this is all this is the setup process right here for Firebase. And hopefully this illustrates to you and to Mr. Taylor that I don't actually have to know much to start working with Firebase. I literally, just to get the whole thing kind of to this point, let's do a code dot so that I can open this project in my very nice Visual Studio Code editor, the editor of champions, or at least me. And then I have these generated files here that you can go and read up on. These are all Firebase specific files. Git ignore file with some ignored files, and here's my functions directory where all of my functions will live, where I put all my business logic. Package.json generated as well from Firebase, and as you can see here, it's actually leveraging the same CLI as iOS. It's just wrapping it in npm. And then we have my index.js file here where I can uncomment this, and then I have my hello world application. And then all I have to do is that I actually have to just use these commands. But I've already created a project that we're going to use instead of this. So I'm going to close this down. And then we're going to look at this demo project, which is pretty much where we started, right? So it's the same thing, database rules, a few things here and there. Everything is pretty much the same thing. And the only difference is the service account key. And that is something that you need to create in order to use the administrative tools for Firebase. So when we were looking at the declaration here, there's a bunch of guides and other things that you can kind of look at here, but in order for us to actually access the database or anything like that within our Firebase account, we need to go to our settings page, and here we can actually create a service account for connecting for all of these different things here. So this is a snippet here that you will actually recognize from my code later on. This, I don't mind you seeing all of this information. That's fine, because I'm going to remove this project as soon as I'm done, because I'm not really using this for anything. But this code here is going to be identical to the code that I find in my index.js file. So what I'm doing here is basically that I'm creating a service account key, which is just a token. It's a token in essence, a JSON file with a token that allows me to connect to this account. So you can see here that I have my credentials. I have URL that hits the database that I have in Firebase. I'm going to show you that as well. And then I have this nice little interface. So I say, okay, Firebase admin.firestore, instantiate the Firestore reference. And then I say db.collection tests, and then I say docs. And then I have this functions.https.onRequest, and this should feel sort of familiar to those of you who do any type of Express development, because this is pretty much how Express does it, except that we have all of these other kind of overhead DSL-like functions, or this SDK. And then we have list messages, add messages. So for listing messages, we say, all right, let's just take a deep breath here. docs, list documents. So get a reference to all the documents. We get a documents ref object here, or it's actually an array with document references. Then we say db.getAll, and then I'm just spreading out this here so that it's an array, and I call getAll with this array here, or like all of these arguments. And then I get back all the docs, and then I look through the docs, and then I say doc.data, so I can push the actual thing that I'm getting from the server or from the database to my results, and then I respond with the results. And add message is fairly straightforward. Docs.add, you basically just reference the collection like so, and you add the thing, and that's the whole story, right? So if I now do curl, this is for the remote environment. I can do this locally as well with Firebase. I can basically just run a local instance, but this I'm just going to do it remotely. And here I called my list message endpoint, and this is where RPC is like something that you should be sort of familiar with. So in order for Firebase to help us create very simple functions and create a very simple, a simple web interface, you simply use an RPC system where you create a function that has a certain name, this name here, ta-da, and when you upload the code through their deployment, and you basically do npm run deploy, what's actually going to happen is that they're just going to use your credentials in the service account, and then they're going to push, well, not the service account necessarily, but they're going to push up the code to their remote environment, which is up here. And then you're going to see your functions end up here. And then they automatically map you to this domain here that you have. You can change this. I've never tried it, but it's because it's never really been that important, but you can change it. And then it automatically maps it to the name of the function. And that's RPC, basically. RPC stands for Remote Procedure Call, and it's just a convention. It's not like you can think of REST as one way of making a web interface, and RPC is another way, and GraphQL is a third way, if you will. And RPC is just a very simple way. You name an endpoint after the function, and then you input stuff into the function, and it returns. So I can, of course, also add stuff here. Let's see here, add message. So I'm going to add a message, and then it returns add message. And I think there's usually a little bit of a delay here, so it might not have actually given me my new, well, the record might take a second or two because it's not real time. There is a real-time database as well, but I'm not using that because I'm not making a live chat application. And here is my database. These are all of my different records. I can go in here and I can say, oh, okay, oh my god, this is great. Let's do that instead, change that. And then if I list, going over the internet, you will see that I actually changed my message. Ta-da! And this is a web interface on top of a database. So the reason why this bit of a problem for me to answer Mr. Taylor's question here is because, like, what documentation is he having an issue with? Like, all of this is pretty much just reading that, and that's the key thing I want you to figure out here. So if I want to use Firebase, it will save me the requirements on knowledge that it would take to do this without their nice SDK and like all of their interfaces and like this sort of, I mean, I don't need to know how MongoDB, I don't actually know which database they're running on Firestore, but it's for sure, I'm pretty sure at least, a NoSQL document database. And you can do this with MongoDB. There are other document databases that you could use as well, but I don't have to learn those. I can just learn Firebase's interface like this, and then, hey, there's my database, right? Now, the problem with that is that that's still required learning. Although it's a lot less for me to comprehend, there's still quite a lot of studying that I have to do in order to actually know how all of this works, and a lot of practicing I have to do in order to ingrain this into my backbone pretty much, so I kind of know this on the command and I don't have to look things up. So there's a lot of investment for me even here, but a lot less than if I wanted to master something that is much more generic, such as MongoDB, which can do all of the things you see here and more. And that's the key thing there. It can do even more, and that's why we have this platform, so that we don't have to think about it so we don't have to deal with it, right? And that is so nice when you want to get something small off the ground really quickly. But as I was going to say, it still requires us to learn this massive amount of libraries and all this other stuff that we have here. I mean, it's a massive investment to get really good at Firebase, and you can get good at that. Now, the issue with that is that leaves you in what we call a vendor locking. So what is a vendor locking? Well, it's actually very simple. Some company somewhere, such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, pretty much, there are many, many more, but all of the vendors, Microsoft, etc., and so forth, they design a product of some sort that is designed with a certain set of goals. Now, the goal of Firebase is to make it easy for me to very quickly, without a lot of, with not as much technical knowledge and all that much setup and so forth, to set up a mobile application integration or with a backend and maybe a web interface or something like that or so forth, so that I don't have to know how to set up a web server. I don't have to know how to set up a database because it's all taken care of for me. All of this. I don't have to know how Google Cloud works, and I don't have to. I could, as I was saying, I'm still saying that I can scratch all of this, and I can go directly to Google Cloud and just build it myself. But I have to know a lot more. So that's the benefit of this. The vendor locking comes in when I start depending on this. If, let's say, in my simple little case here, it's perfect because it's going to save me a lot of time. I don't have to do a lot of extra work, and I don't have to know so much. And then my company becomes a big success, and all of a sudden this starts costing me money because now it's free, because of course it's like crack. It's free in the beginning, and then it starts costing you when it actually starts, when you start to get that magic moment that none of these companies will tell you about, which is the moment they are waiting for. The moment they are waiting for is when your company becomes a success and you get to a point where you don't really have the luxury or the time or the resources to move from their platform to a new one, even if that would have been the best thing for you. Because in the beginning, this is very convenient, but when the system becomes really complicated, I can promise you that it can scale, but it can also not scale depending on your use case. And it's very tricky sometimes to ahead of time know what sort of use case you actually are going to have when, let's say, that you start as a small little company and then all of a sudden you become super popular, and then 5 years later you realize that shit, we've caused so many problems for ourselves and we've had so many issues with scalability because we are using Firebase, because Firebase was technically not really designed for our use case, or there are things we need to do that we can't do through Firebase. And then you are in that vendor locking situation where anything you want to do has to fit into the confines of this platform, because this is the trade-off. You lose flexibility for convenience. And the cost is very simple. You just have to learn all of their SDKs and all of their special ways of doing things, and how their database works and how their hosting solution works. You just have to learn all of the stuff that they have. And as a professional developer, this is simply not the way to go if you want to be a real industry professional. This is perfect. I use Firebase myself, so I'm not bash talking Firebase. I have used it in fairly serious projects, and I have coworkers who have their own projects that are semi-serious, but these are still hobby-level applications that they are running. And there are companies who are using Firebase or AVS's Lambda functions and serverless and so forth to a great success. But I want you to be aware of that there is only one thing that you need to know in order to start doing this, apart from knowing how to use JavaScript and so forth, and that is to read and just kind of swallow that doing their way and doing things their way is the way to go. Now, for a big company, such as, say, the sort of companies that you will face when you want to work for when you want to work in real professional development, in the sort of development that they do at, say, Google, Amazon, like the big companies, and not only those companies, in pretty much all the companies, usually these companies, they don't invest in something like Firebase for one specific reason, and that is because they want to be flexible. They don't want the vendor locking, because if they As you can imagine, let's say that some super company invests in Firebase and then all of a sudden they need to ship something that doesn't really fit so well into that platform. Then they're gonna lose tons and tons and tons of money, and they're gonna have big problems with migration costs, because that's what this is designed to do. It's designed to be very easy to get started and very hard to get out. That's the whole purpose of this. So you want to avoid this sort of thing if you can when you're dealing with a system that has an unknown lifespan, when you're trying to build a company like that's going to be the next Google or Facebook or something of that sort of scale. It's perfect for your own personal projects. It's perfect for your own little startup before the idea has actually taken real root and become something big and so forth. And one thing that I think is very important to take away from a tool such as Firebase is that the limitation of Firebase is that this is an off-the-shelf solution that tries to cater to as many customers as possible. But the learnings that they give, I think, are very interesting and very useful for your own personal development in your own company. So what I suggest is that if you are working for a company that doesn't really want to bet on something like Firebase or something like that, well, maybe there's a way for you to create your own internal tooling so that you don't actually have to deal with all of the hazards that come and all the inconvenience that comes with always building something from scratch. Let me explain. So I have this tiny little project that I built for demo purposes, which is called FC Serve, which is an absolute crap CLI and an absolute crap system, but it's designed to illustrate a point. So this CLI here that I built, let's go one level up here and let's do something like make dir foobar, and let's go into foobar. And then let's say fc serve --h. So this is my little CLI here, and this CLI I designed with the intention of demoing an idea to a few of my coworkers, where I was stating that one of the problems with having a tech stack and having, especially in front end, all these different developers that all have their own preferences in tooling, and everybody needs to learn like, oh, Webpack and what loaders are you using, and what are you using, React, are you using Angular, all of these different things, right? You can actually make this experience much, much simpler. And I argue that if you embrace this mindset of creating your own higher level tooling in order to just do your daily stuff, you can actually make it more junior profiles and people with less experience actually very productive without the risk of them messing something up, and at the same time they don't have to learn as much. So if I say fc serve here and I say init like so, it's going to just prompt me here, and if you're paying attention now, this prompt here is the npm init prompt. This is the same thing. Basically what it's doing now is that it's just in a very crude manner installing all of my, like, it allows me to give some like information about name of the project and version and description and stuff like that, but it's without my saying so installing all of my dependencies, and it's going to generate a bunch of template files just like Firebase was doing, just exactly the same way. So I don't have to learn how to do all of this. I don't have to go to my company's project and read up on every single package and every single damn dependencies we have and so forth and learn all of these things by heart. What I have to learn is how to use this tool that someone at my job has created for me, so that I have a development environment that is the same on every single developer's laptop. We all use the same dependencies, we use the same workflow. So if we can standardize on that, it actually makes things fairly simple. So let's say I say code dot here, and I open up this. So here is an fc serve project, pretty much. All it is a package.json file with a bunch of opinionated libraries that I, as the, or in this case, I'm going to pretend I'm the senior developer or I'm the architect or whatever at my company. And I've decided that, okay, these are the dependencies we are using. It doesn't matter if someone decides that, which is the common case in front end, they add like their own dependency here, because this is not going to work, because if they try to run the application in production with a new package, it's going to throw an error, because the tooling doesn't actually allow you to use anything besides these packages. This might be a little bit fascist, or call it whatever you want, but what it does bring is consistency, and that is extremely important. And then we have this config YAML file here, and this here is just a configuration file for where do I want my static files to go, what port am I going to run locally, what's the name that I'm going to use for my server here in my project. And here's some client information where I have a output file for my CSS and an entry point into my CSS and a JS, like where I'm going to put my generated JavaScript assets. And in this case, it defaults to TypeScript. So I can see here that I have this main TSX file, and there's some HTML configurations here and so forth. So I haven't documented any of this, and I'm not saying that you should use this. Please don't. This is a really shitty, like I'm not in any way promoting you to use this at all. This is just for demo purposes. But it's basically just done the same thing as Firebase did for me in a very crude manner. So I generated this hello world function here that when I start this server is going to be mapped to the /hello endpoint path with the get method. So if I send a get to /hello, it's going to automatically map it to this logic here. So me as the developer, I don't have to know how to set up an Express project. I don't have to know how to configure all of these different things and how to set up a server with with the right middlewares and the authentication and like how to deal with 500 errors and 404 errors and like all of this other stuff that comes with having to set something up from scratch. All I have to know is how to deal with this little config file and how to write the function. That's it. That's serverless in a nutshell. That's exactly what Firebase is doing for you. And here we're adding some extra layers on top. Okay, so I don't need to know how to set up a Webpack configuration. I don't need to know how to set up a React project or how to do any of those other best practices that kind of doesn't have to do with creating my business logic. It's all free. It's all done for me because this person who made FC Server, my company, like this internal tool that we're using, is just taking care of it for me. Same thing with CSS here. We don't have to worry so much about, oh, are some people are going to use this or that and how are we going to do it? It doesn't really matter because there is one way of doing it. It's consistent across every product that we build, because as long as we're using this tool, we can always guarantee that every project that we deliver is going to be consistent with every other project. There's no way to create like a project that is vastly different from all the other projects, and that consistency is extremely powerful. And then we have our index.html file here that just kind of is outputted as well. So this thing here that I just did, this is the exact same Firebase represents. It's just an abstraction layer on top of a bunch of tooling under the hood. This is just if we go and look at the actual project here. So this is the CLI code here. Let's look at my libs folder here. We have a bunch of packages here, internal packages, which are these packages here, and a bunch of code here that just kind of generates all of these files for us. And then there's a function loader here, and all of the function loader is that it basically goes and it looks at the configuration that we provide to this tool, and it just loads all the function and then maps them internally. If we look at let's see here, I think, no, this is for building containers. And then there's a bundler here. Well, like this is a Webpack configuration. Like it's just and this is the kind of the thing. Like you have some experienced developer in your company or a team of developers who just sets all the standards and create this higher level tool that just abstracts away all of these nitty-gritty config details and all this stuff that you don't really need to care about when you're just working. And then you have a wrapper around that. And let's take arguments for an example here. I'm using Commander for this, where I'm just basically, this is how I set up the entire config. So now, through that configuration system I was telling you, I can actually express, okay, if I do fc serve-s, it's going to start the server. If I want to start my Webpack configuration or like run Webpack, I can do it this way. Post CSS is run through this. I can just do a release, I can init, I can do verbose logging, I can just create a build for a Docker image, and I can update my packages if something new has been published, right? So I'm removing the freedom to do whatever I want, that flexibility, in favor of trying to make people more productive. The danger about this is if you have some person in your company who thinks he or she is very clever and they make some really advanced internal tool that doesn't really work and nobody really likes to work with it, and then they leave the company, and all of a sudden you have a development process that is tied into a old work style that nobody really understands how it works anymore. So if you want this to work, you should embrace this in the same sort of way as Google and the other companies that actually do this at the highest level, how they actually do it. If you look at something like Kubernetes, for example, it started out as an internal project called Borg, and then it evolved into such a great tool for their internal work that they actually open sourced it and made it a full-fledged product. That's the sort of attention that you need to pay to these sorts of internal tools when you create them. But if you can make them in the right way, you will be surprised at how easy it can actually become to get productive in your code base, and you can actually onboard very, like, I'm not saying junior per se, but you don't need master programmers for every project, because if we look at like this basic idea, imagine that all the people working needed to know was how to set up this config file and then how to consume, just as in Firebase. You need to know, okay, if you do in Firebase, for example, you have all these library functions here. Like, as long as you know what all of this does, you don't have to know how the underlying technology actually works. You just need to memorize, okay, I initialize my database connection like this, I call these functions, and that gives me all of these things for free, right? And if you do that for your own company, that is actually a very, very efficient way for you to create, well, quite a lot of developer velocity. The problem is if you want to do something, as I said, that isn't really supported with one of these other vendors, because they are trying to solve a problem for all companies, or most of them, and that's kind of bad for you. But what's not a bad idea for you is to create your own solution to this sort of problem, where you just identify the boilerplate code that you write every single day, and you create an abstraction on top that makes it easier to work on at your company. So what I want you to take away from this is that Firebase, if you want to learn Firebase, or if what knowledge you need is basically just, you need to learn how to use JavaScript, and then you need to sit and just read their documentation. That's all it is. The danger about that is that leads to vendor locking, and vendor locking means that if you only learn Firebase, you are pretty much useless outside of Firebase. All of the stuff that Firebase does, you can learn, like the real underlying tools that actually do all of these nice things for you. And you can do this on your own. And that is the sort of experience you kind of need if you want to be a professional developer. But it helps you get very productive very quickly. And it's a very nice way to get quickly up with and running with something, right? And that is a bad thing if you do it for the wrong project, but it's a really good thing if you do it for the right project. And the learnings you should take from tools such as Firebase and Docker and React and Angular and so forth is that some tools are already so well made that you can just use them as is, and they're going to scale very well with your project. But there are certain tools that will actually just slow you down, and you're going to go into a vendor locking situation. And in those scenarios, it might actually be a good idea to look at your own work process at your company and think, is there some way that I can create a CLI or some tool or some automation on top of my own work, so that I don't have to do all the boring stuff that everybody does, that we have to do all the days, right? And just focus on writing business logic, such as that's kind of the heart of serverless. I shouldn't have to know how to set up my entire project and all the infrastructure, and that's the same thing as in Firebase. I just need to know, how do I deal with the incoming request in a function? Like, how can I write some business logic that is in a function, and then that's pretty much it. So hopefully you have gotten a better understanding of Firebase and serverless, and kind of this idea of vendor locking, and what considerations to have when you decide which type of, what path you're going to pick. Have a great day.